My HOA neighbor called 911 to force her way into my house. I'm just sitting there when Kelly Turner starts pounding on my door like a maniac, screaming about safety violations. I laugh and tell her we're not even in her wrong house, lady. She gives me this death stare and hisses, "You have no idea what you just started." 2 hours later, she makes that call. I thought I'd won. I was dead wrong. What happened next completely turned my life upside down. Comment if you've ever dealt with a psycho neighbor, because this story will make you double-check your locks tonight. Listen, I'm Aaron Thompson and I'm a tech guy. I deal with data systems and logic. But standing there on my first day in what should have been my dream house, looking at Kelly Turner's manila folder spilling photos across my coffee table, my brain just broke. Like when your computer crashes and you stare at the blue screen thinking, what the hell just happened? These weren't casual snapshots. These were surveillance-level documentation. Aerial shots of my roof taken from God knows where. Close-ups of my mailbox numbers. Window measurements written in her disturbingly neat handwriting. Living room 72 in x 48 inches. Bedroom facing street in x 36 inches. Every detail catalogued like she was planning a heist. "When did you take these?" I asked, my voice coming out strangled. Kelly's eyes never left the photos, her finger tracing the outline of my front door like she was memorizing it. "These split levels," she said, her nail scratching against the glossy surface. "My father used to build houses exactly like this one." The way she said it made my skin crawl. Not past tense like a normal person remembering, but present tense like he was still out there somewhere, still building. There are things that need to be checked. The scratch of her fingernail against the photo sounded like chalk on a blackboard. And I realized this woman wasn't just weird. She was completely unhinged. Here's where it gets interesting, though. See, I'm the kind of guy who documents everything. Occupational hazard of working in IT security. So, when Kelly started her whole welcome inspection routine, claiming she had authority over my property, I was ready. I pulled out my phone, hit record, and showed her my property deed. Clear as day, my house sits outside the Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association boundary. Not even close. We're talking a good 50-yard beyond their jurisdiction. But Kelly dismissed legal documents like they were grocery store coupons. "Property boundaries don't override community safety protocols," she said with this creepy smile. "As HOA safety coordinator, these split-level houses fall under community oversight due to proximity and safety concerns. Your house should be under HOA jurisdiction." That's when I knew I was dealing with someone who lived in her own little world where reality was optional. But here's where I got my first win. And trust me, in this story, I needed every small victory I could get. Kelly handed me what looked like an official building inspection notice, complete with city letterhead and everything. Real professional look stuff, except I'm paranoid by nature. So, I called the number on the form right there in front of her. "City Building Department." The voice answered, "Yeah, I've got Inspector Johnson here claiming I need an emergency structural review." I said, watching Kelly's face. Long pause. "Sir, we don't have an Inspector Johnson. This sounds like fraud." The look on Kelly's face when I put the phone on speaker priceless, like watching someone realize their lottery ticket was fake. The building department supervisor was not happy. Turns out Kelly had been pulling this scam using her connections from when she worked as a school principal, calling in favors, dropping names, basically abusing every professional relationship she'd ever had. They added her to their do not contact list on the spot, and threatened fraud charges if she continued impersonating city officials. Victory number 1 for Team Thompson. But instead of backing down like a normal person caught red-handed, Kelly doubled down. "Technicalities don't override community safety," she muttered, gathering up her photos with shaking hands. "These split-level houses, my father used to build houses exactly like this. There are dangerous things that need to be checked." The way she said it made my skin crawl. Not past tense like a normal person remembering, but present tense like he was still out there somewhere, still building. The whole interaction lasted maybe 20 minutes, but it felt like hours. Kelly finally left, but not before making one comment that should have sent me packing immediately. "Mr. Thompson, as elected safety coordinator for Oakwood Estates, I have community oversight responsibilities that supersede property line technicalities. Legal boundaries are just lines on paper. Community safety transcends paperwork." Elected by whom I wasn't even in their HOA, but the way she said community safety like she was some kind of guardian angel protecting us all from invisible dangers. That's when I realized Kelly Turner wasn't just annoying. She was dangerous. The kind of danger that hides behind official-sounding titles and fake authority. Ashley got home just as Kelly's golf cart squeaked away down the street. Yeah, this 52-year-old woman drove around the neighborhood in a golf cart like some demented security guard. My wife took one look at my face and knew something was wrong. Ashley's got this amazing ability. Comes from working as a 911 dispatcher for 6 years. She can read people's stress levels like a barometer. "What happened?" she asked, and I showed her the photos. Her reaction was immediate and professional. "Aaron, this isn't normal neighbor behavior. She's exhibiting stalker patterns with specific target fixation. The fact that she documented your house before you lived here. That's premeditation. She studied the measurements Kelly had written and these utility calls she mentioned. That's a common predator tactic to gain property access." That evening, Ashley filled me in on what dispatchers call escalation patterns. Apparently, people like Kelly don't just wake up one day and decide to harass neighbors. They build up to it. Start with small boundary violations, test responses, then escalate when they don't get pushed back. "The good news," Ashley said, sorting through Kelly's photos, "is that you documented everything and called her bluff immediately. That probably prevented months of harassment." She paused, studying an aerial shot of our roof. "The bad news, people like this don't give up easily. They see resistance as a challenge to overcome." Then she said something that would prove tragically prophetic. "I'm working a mandatory double shift this weekend. We're critically understaffed. I'll be covering the downtown district until 6 p.m. then switching to the residential zone. Just keep documenting everything. Okay." As we settled in for our first night in the new house, I felt pretty good about how things went. I'd exposed Kelly's fake paperwork, gotten her flagged by the building department, and established clear boundaries. Problem solved. Right, wrong. So, very, very wrong. Because what I didn't know, what none of us knew was that Kelly Turner had been playing this game for 20 years. And she was just getting started. The photos, the measurements, the fake inspection notices, that was Kelly being polite. That was her asking nicely. And when Kelly Turner stopped asking nicely, people got hurt. Around 11 p.m., I was setting up my home office when I heard Harold Jenkins calling from his front yard next door. Harold's a 65-year-old retired cop with the kind of weathered face that's seen everything twice. Great neighbor, the kind who brings your garbage cans in and doesn't ask nosy questions. But tonight, Harold looked worried. "Son," he called over the fence. "Got a minute?" I walked outside and Harold glanced around like he was checking for surveillance. "She's been photographing your house for months," he said quietly. "And about that father-built houses comment she made." Harold's face went pale in the porch light. "Did she mention anything about Peterson? The man who died here before you moved in?" The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. My blood ran cold as Harold's words sank in. What exactly happened to Peterson? And why was Harold so afraid to talk about it? The next morning, I couldn't shake Harold's words about Peterson. Who was this guy and what happened to him in my house? I decided to do what any paranoid IT professional would do, investigate. While Ashley was at work, I started going through the paperwork the previous realtor had left behind. Most of it was standard My hands started shaking as the implications hit me. Kelly hadn't just been watching my house for months. She'd been inside it. The photos Peterson had managed to take were even worse. Grainy cell phone picture showing Kelly at 2:17 a.m. standing outside his bedroom window with a flashlight and measuring tape. Kelly is testing his gate latch. Kelly is walking around his foundation with some kind of electronic device. The timestamp showed this had been going on for months before his death. One photo was particularly chilling. Kelly standing in Peterson's backyard at 3 a.m. talking to herself, gesturing at the house like she was having a conversation with someone invisible. The man had been documenting his own psychological torture, collecting evidence that no one would ever see until it was too late. I immediately called Harold, and this time he didn't dance around the subject. "Aaron, I need to tell you something, but you're not going to like it." Harold's voice was heavy with guilt. Peterson came to me 3 times in his final weeks, begging for help. Said Kelly was making his life hell, claiming she had the authority to inspect his house whenever she wanted. I told him to call the police, but Harold paused and I could hear the regret. Police don't take neighbor disputes seriously unless someone gets hurt. By the time they would have listened, Peterson was dead. Harold had to clear his throat before continuing. "Look, should have helped him more. I should have taken his complaints seriously. I'm not making that mistake with you." Harold came over and confirmed what I had suspected. Kelly had manipulated Peterson into making her his emergency contact. She convinced him it was for safety. Harold explained, studying Peterson's photos, told him that split-level houses from the 1970s had structural issues that needed regular monitoring. Peterson was 73, lived alone, and didn't know any better. Kelly played on his fears, made herself indispensable, then used that access to torment him. The worst part, Harold had seen Kelly entering Peterson's property multiple times, but assumed Peterson had given permission. She had keys, Aaron, official-looking clipboard. Acted like she belonged there. I thought maybe it was some kind of senior assistance program. Within a week of finding Peterson's evidence, Kelly launched what I can only describe as a multi-front psychological warfare campaign. Monday morning, 3 anonymous noise complaints were filed with the police. All from different phone numbers, all reporting suspicious activity at my address. Tuesday, a concerned citizen called the building department claiming I was running an unlicensed business from home. On Wednesday, Kelly's former coworker from the school district showed up, claiming there were reports of structural damage to my foundation. Every single complaint traced back to Kelly, but she was smart enough to use different approaches each time. Not forgeries, just abuse of personal relationships and official-sounding authority. But here's where my IT background came in handy. I documented everything. Timestamps, phone numbers, and GPS coordinates of when Kelly drove by to check on things. I traced the anonymous complaints through call timing patterns. Kelly would drive by our house park for exactly 3 minutes, then complaints would be filed within the hour. When her school district friend showed up with concerns about my foundation, I was ready. "Before you inspect anything," I said, "can you show me the official complaint?" Turns out there was no official complaint. Just Kelly calling her buddy and asking him to check on safety concerns at my address. Another fake authority play exposed another small victory for Team Thompson. Kelly's retaliation was swift and escalating. She started filing reports with the city claiming I was refusing to comply with neighborhood safety standards. She contacted my internet provider claiming suspicious network activity from my address. She even tried to get my car towed, claiming it was parked illegally on public property, which it wasn't. Each attempt was more desperate than the last. And each time I had documentation proving Kelly was behind it. But what really scared me wasn't the fake complaints. It was Kelly's behavior when she thought no one was watching. My new security cameras caught her at 11 p.m. walking around my property with a flashlight testing windows and doors like she was planning a break-in. Ashley came home Friday evening to find me surrounded by printouts, photos, and documentation. "Honey," she said, taking in the wall of evidence I'd created. "This looks like a serial killer investigation board." That's when I showed her Peterson's folder and the security footage of Kelly's nighttime visits. Ashley's professional training kicked in immediately. She studied the timestamps, the patterns of the escalation. "Aaron, this isn't random harassment. She's conducting surveillance. The nighttime visits, the systematic testing of entry points. She's preparing for something." Ashley paused the security footage on a frame showing Kelly trying to peek through our bedroom window. "This woman isn't just obsessed with your house. She thinks she has a right to access it." And that's when Ashley mentioned something that would prove crucial later. "I'm working a mandatory double shift this weekend. We're critically understaffed, covering the downtown district until 6 p.m., then switching to residential zone coverage." She explained how the 911 dispatch system worked during shift transitions. There's usually an overlap period where calls can get routed to either dispatcher. "Just keep documenting everything. Okay." And Aaron. Ashley's dispatcher training had taught her to recognize escalation patterns. People like Kelly don't stop when they meet resistance. They escalate. Be ready for her to try something desperate. Saturday evening, I was reviewing security footage when I noticed something that made my blood freeze. Kelly wasn't just walking around my property anymore. She was practicing. The cameras caught her standing at my front door with official-looking paperwork talking to herself. "Yes, officer. I'm HOA safety coordinator. I need to check for emergency safety violations. The residents won't allow mandatory inspection." She was rehearsing, perfecting her story, getting ready to make a play that would force her way into my house. The woman was literally practicing fake emergency scenarios on my doorstep, and I had it all recorded in high definition. Harold approached me that evening as I was checking the security system one more time. "Aaron, I need to tell you something about Peterson's final days," he said, glancing around nervously. "Look, I know you're trying to stay out of neighbor drama, but this woman is escalating." "What happened to Peterson?" I pressed. Harold finally opened up. Peterson was scared out of his mind those final weeks. Kelly had convinced him she had HOA emergency inspection rights. Poor man didn't know any better. Thought he was legally required to let her in whenever she demanded. Harold's Weathers' hands shook as he continued. She convinced him his house was structurally dangerous, that he needed constant monitoring for safety violations. Peterson spent his last month tearing apart walls looking for imaginary problems that Kelly claimed were there. As Harold was talking, my phone buzzed with a motion sensor alert. I pulled up the live feed and there she was, Kelly Turner standing at my front door with official-looking paperwork practicing her emergency story one more time. "Yes, officer. I heard someone in distress inside. I need immediate police assistance to gain entry for an emergency welfare check. As safety coordinator, I have the authority to inspect, but they've barricaded the property." She was getting ready to make her move. The question that haunted me as I watched her rehearse was simple. If Kelly was willing to call 911 with fake emergency claims to get into my house, what exactly was she looking for inside? But here's the twist that makes this story legendary. Who do you think answered that 911 call? Sunday evening, 5:47 p.m. I was in my home office. Ashley was at the dispatch center covering her double shift transition from downtown to residential zones. And Kelly Turner was about to make the most catastrophic decision of her deranged life. My security cameras showed her pacing outside my gate, muttering to herself, clutching that same official-looking paperwork she'd been rehearsing with all weekend. What I didn't know, what none of us knew, was that in exactly 3 minutes, Kelly was going to dial 911 and try to weaponize the emergency response system to break into my house. And the person who would answer that call, my wife Ashley, was sitting in the dispatch center 20 minutes away, completely unaware that she was about to become an unwilling accomplice in Kelly's insane scheme. Here's how it went down. And I know because we got the full recording later in court. 5:47 p.m. exactly. 911. What's your emergency? Ashley's voice calm and professional like always. Kelly breathing hard like she'd been running. This is Kelly Turner, HOA, Safety Coordinator for Oakwood Estates. I'm at 1247 Oak Street. I can hear someone in distress inside, but the residents are refusing mandatory safety inspection. I need immediate police assistance to gain entry for an emergency welfare check. The genius of Kelly's con was that she didn't claim domestic violence or break-ins. She claimed authority. She positioned herself as an official trying to help someone in danger, blocked by unreasonable residents who wouldn't comply with safety protocols. Ashley, following standard protocol, asked, "Ma'am, can you confirm what type of emergency you're witnessing?" Kelly had practiced this part. Someone could be heard inside. I heard distressing sounds, but they've barricaded the property with security gates. As safety coordinator, I have the authority to inspect for community welfare, but I need officers to help me gain entry immediately. The dispatcher training kicked in. Ashley dispatched patrol units plus a supervisor for what appeared to be a welfare check requested by an HOA official. Standard procedure, reasonable response, except for one tiny detail that would turn this whole situation nuclear. Ashley slowly recognized the address being repeated back to her. 1247 Oak Street. Wait, that's my street. That's my exact address. The moment of realization hit Ashley like a freight train. She's sitting there, dispatch headset on, looking at her computer screen, showing units being deployed to her house. Her own voice calm and professional dispatching officers to potentially force entry into her own home based on the claims of some unidentified HOA safety coordinator. Ashley later told me this was when her professional training collided with personal horror. She couldn't abandon an active emergency call, but she was watching herself become the instrument of whatever Kelly was planning. The procedure manual doesn't cover what to do when you accidentally dispatch police to arrest your own husband. Meanwhile, I'm at home completely oblivious, reviewing security footage when I hear sirens getting closer. Then closer. Then it stopped right outside my house. I look at the live camera feed and see 2 patrol cars plus a supervisor vehicle parked in front of my gate. Officers getting out, checking their equipment, preparing for what they clearly expected to be a challenging situation. Kelly's standing there with her clipboard playing the concerned official, perfectly pointing at my house and gesturing like she's explaining a complex emergency situation. That's when it hit me. Kelly had actually done it. She'd called the cops with some fake emergency story to try forcing her way into my house. I walked to my front door and opened it before the officers could knock. "Good evening, officers. What can I help you with?" The lead officer, badge reading Sergeant Harris, looked confused by my calm demeanor. "Sir, we received a report from HA Safety Coordinator Turner here that someone inside your residence may require medical attention. She's requesting assistance with a mandatory welfare check." That's when I realized the absolute brilliance and insanity of Kelly's plan. She wasn't claiming I was dangerous. She was claiming someone inside was in danger and she needed help getting in to save them. It was manipulative genius wrapped in complete delusion. "Officer, there's no emergency here," I said, gesturing to my obviously fine self. "My wife is at work. She's a 911 dispatcher, actually, and I've been home alone all evening." Sergeant Harris looked between me and Kelly, clearly trying to figure out what was happening. Kelly, not missing a beat, launched into her prepared statement. "Sergeant, as elected safety coordinator, I have community oversight responsibilities. I heard distressing sounds and attempted to perform a wellness check, but the residents refused to allow a mandatory inspection. This could be a safety emergency." The woman was doubling down on fake authority, even with the police right there. That's when Sergeant Harris made the radio call that would change everything. "Dispatch, can you confirm the caller's authority and dispatcher identity for this call?" Static crackled through his radio. Then Ashley's voice, my wife's voice, came through crystal clear. Caller reported as Kelly Turner claiming HOA position. Authority status unverified. Dispatcher handling this call is Ashley Thompson. The silence that followed was deafening. Sergeant Harris looked at me. I looked at him. Kelly looked confused. Then the nuclear bomb dropped. Ashley Thompson is my wife, I shouted. She's the one who dispatched you here. The revelation hit everyone simultaneously. Kelly's face went from smug satisfaction to dawning horror as she realized whose life she just tried to destroy. The officers looked like they'd been handed a logic puzzle designed by a madman. And me, I felt like I was in some kind of nightmare sitcom where the punchline was my wife accidentally becoming the weapon someone used against our own family. Ashley had sent armed police to potentially break into her own home, arrest her own husband, and assist a delusional neighbor in whatever sick game she was playing. The odds of this happening were astronomical, like getting struck by lightning while winning the lottery while being attacked by a shark in your own living room. Sergeant Harris immediately radioed back to dispatch. We have a situation here. The complainant appears to have made false claims about emergency authority. The homeowner is cooperative and denies any emergency. Requesting supervisory review of this call. Kelly, realizing her perfect plan was falling apart, made one last desperate play. Officers, you don't understand. These split-level houses have inherent structural dangers. My father built houses like this. I know what to look for. There could be hidden safety violations that require immediate inspection. Even facing arrest, she was still trying to sell the story that she had legitimate authority to break into my house. That's when Kelly got arrested for filing a false emergency report, abuse of authority, and attempted breaking and entering under color of law. Serious felonies that carry real prison time. But instead of looking defeated as they put her in the patrol car, Kelly was smiling. Actually smiling. Now you'll see, she called out as they closed the door. The investigation will prove I was right. They'll have to search the house now. Even in custody, she thought her plan was working. The woman was so delusional that she believed getting arrested would somehow give her access to my property through the legal system. Ashley arrived on scene 15 minutes later, still in her dispatcher uniform, looking like she'd seen a ghost. She saw me explaining everything to the officers, Kelly in the patrol car, still ranting about inspection rights and the horrible realization of what had happened written all over the crime scene. I dispatched the call she used to try, forcing into our own home, Ashley said, staring at the patrol car where Kelly sat, grinning like she'd won the lottery. She played me like an instrument. She turned my job, my training, my dedication to helping people into a weapon against my own family. But as Ashley stared at Kelly through the patrol car window, one terrifying question haunted both of us. If Kelly was willing to abuse the 911 system to get into our house, what exactly was she looking for? Inside, drop a comment below. Have you ever had a neighbor who crossed the line? How far did they go? Because what we discovered next made Kelly's obsession look like just the beginning. You know what's worse than finding out your neighbor is completely insane? Finding out she's been systematically destroying lives for years, and nobody stopped her. After Kelly's arrest, I became obsessed with understanding what we were really dealing with. The false 911 call wasn't some spontaneous breakdown. It was the culmination of decades of psychological warfare. And Peterson wasn't Kelly's first victim. He was just the most recent casualty in a 20-year campaign of terror that nobody had connected until now. While Kelly sat in jail awaiting arraignment, I dove into the paperwork the realtor had left behind. And what I found made my blood run cold. Buried in the closing documents was Peterson's complete file. Peterson, being 73 and trusting, went along with it. The entries got progressively more desperate. March 30th, Kelly found measuring my bedroom windows again. Says father's construction needs verification. Don't understand what she means. April 10th, made Kelly the emergency contact like she suggested. Seemed reasonable for senior safety. April 20th, Kelly has keys now, says it's for emergency access. Feel uncomfortable, but don't know how to say no. What Peterson documented was textbook psychological manipulation. Kelly had systematically isolated an elderly man, made herself indispensable, then used that position to torment him. The final entries were heartbreaking. May 15th, can't sleep. She's outside every night with that flashlight. May 20th, found her inside the house at 3 a.m., she said. Checking for foundation problems. May 25th, I think I'm going crazy. But here's what made Peterson different from Kelly's other victims. He fought back the only way he knew how. Hidden throughout his records were grainy cell phone photos documenting Kelly's stalking behavior. Kelly at 2:17 a.m. with industrial measuring equipment. Kelly is testing his gate locks with different keys. Kelly is standing in his backyard having animated conversations with invisible people about structural integrity failures and construction cover-ups. And the timestamp showed this went on for months and Peterson captured it all. The man might have been terrified, but he wasn't stupid. He knew he needed evidence even if nobody would listen to him while he was alive. The most chilling discovery was Peterson's final phone log. 3 calls to police about neighbor harassment, all dismissed as civil matters. 2 calls to Adult Protective Services. Both resulted in brief visits where Kelly convinced social workers she was helping Peterson maintain his property. 1 call to the city building department. They told him to handle it through the HOA. Peterson had tried every official channel and had failed with all of them. His last entry dated 2 days before his death was just a phone number with a note. If something happens to me, this is who she really is. The number Kelly's direct line at her old school job with a notation. Fired for harassment, multiple complaints. They'll have records. I called that number and reached Peterson's former principal colleague, now retired. Oh, God. Kelly Turner, the woman said when I explained the situation. We had to let her go 5 years ago after multiple parent complaints about excessive disciplinary measures and boundary violations. She'd show up at students' homes claiming educational welfare checks. Parents found her measuring their children's bedroom windows for safety compliance. The woman was obsessed with control and had this bizarre fixation on house inspections. Apparently, Kelly had been pulling the same scam for years, using official-sounding authority to gain access to people's homes, then tormenting them with imaginary violations. That's when I realized Peterson hadn't just been Kelly's victim, he'd been her training ground. She'd perfected her techniques on a vulnerable elderly man, learning what worked and what didn't. The fake authority claims the safety coordinator title, the emergency contact manipulation. It was all beta testing for bigger targets. Peterson's death gave Kelly an empty house to obsess over. And when I bought it, she simply transferred her delusion to new victims. We weren't random targets. We were the next phase in Kelly's 20-year psychological experiment. Armed with Peterson's evidence, I reached out to my immediate neighbors, Harold, Mrs. Hayes, next door, and the Washington family across the street. These weren't random strangers. They were the people who had watched Peterson decline, who had seen Kelly's behavior escalate, who felt guilty about not doing more to help. When I showed them Peterson's photos and documentation, the response was immediate and unified. We should have helped him, Harold said, his weathered hands shaking as he studied the pictures. We all saw her harassing that poor man, but nobody wanted to get involved in neighbor drama. Now look what happened. Mrs. Hayes was more direct. She killed him. Maybe not with her hands, but she killed him just the same. But here's what I learned about community psychology. Most people don't get involved in neighbor disputes, even when they see someone being terrorized. Fear, apathy, and the bystander effect create this perfect storm where predators like Kelly can operate for years without anyone stopping them. The Washington family admitted they'd seen Kelly prowling around Peterson's house at night, but assumed it was some kind of authorized senior care arrangement. Harold had witnessed Kelly entering Peterson's property multiple times, but thought Peterson had given permission. Everyone saw pieces of the abuse, but nobody connected the dots until it was too late. The small group that formed around Peterson's evidence became our informal support network. Not some grand neighborhood committee, just 4 households who decided they wouldn't make the same mistake twice. Harold reluctantly agreed to be our spokesperson because his police background gave him credibility with authorities. Mrs. Hayes offered to document Kelly's behavior from her vantage point overlooking the street. The Washingtons agreed to provide witness testimony if needed. It wasn't much, but it was more than Peterson ever had. We were going to make sure Kelly's pattern of abuse was exposed and stopped. Meanwhile, Kelly's behavior during her brief jail stay was revealing in its own way. According to the booking officer I spoke with, Kelly spent her entire detention period demanding to speak with building inspectors about structural emergency protocols and insisting her arrest was preventing her from performing critical safety functions. Even locked up, she maintained the delusion that she had legitimate authority and was being persecuted for doing her job. The woman was so deep in her fantasy world that reality couldn't penetrate. Getting arrested hadn't shaken her confidence. It had reinforced her belief that everyone else was wrong and she was the only one trying to protect community safety. The really disturbing part came when Ashley ran Kelly's information through official databases at work. Remember, Ashley's been a 911 dispatcher for 6 years. She knows how to research complaint patterns and identify repeat offenders. What she found made us both sick. Kelly had called 911 about our address 8 times over 6 months before we even lived there. Noise complaints, suspicious activity reports, possible break-ins, all targeting Peterson, all fake, all designed to make his life miserable. Kelly had been using the emergency response system as her personal harassment tool for years, and nobody had connected the pattern until now. The disturbing pattern was clear, but one detail made my blood run cold. Kelly's final call about Peterson was logged just 48 hours before his death. The report claimed elderly resident in distress, possible medical emergency requires immediate welfare check. What did Kelly tell 911 about Peterson in that final call? And did her lies contribute to what happened to him? 3 weeks after Kelly's arrest, the police obtained a search warrant for her house based on Peterson's evidence and our harassment complaints. As the primary complainant, I was allowed to accompany the officers, which turned out to be both the best and worst decision I could have made. Because what we found in Kelly Turner's basement wasn't just evidence of obsession. It was a 20-year archive of psychological terrorism that made every horror movie I'd ever seen look like a Disney cartoon. Walking down those basement steps, smelling the musty odor of old paper and something metallic I couldn't identify. I had no idea I was about to see the most disturbing thing in my entire life. The first thing that hit me was the sheer scope of it all. Kelly's basement looked like a serial killer's trophy room mixed with an architect's office and a paranoid conspiracy theorist's den. Every wall was covered floor to ceiling with photographs, blueprints, measurements, and what appeared to be surveillance reports. But these weren't random houses. They were all split-level homes built in the 1970s, all within a 50 miles radius, all documented with the same obsessive detail Kelly had applied to my property. Officer Harris whistled low as his flashlight swept across the walls. "Ma'am," he called up to Kelly, who was standing at the top of the stairs in handcuffs. "How many houses have you been inside without permission?" Kelly's response chilled everyone in that basement. They weren't break-ins. They were structural inspections. My father's work needed verification. The center of the basement contained what can only be described as a shrine to Kelly's dead father. A workshop table covered with his old construction tools, faded photos of housing developments from the 1970s, and dozens of awards for excellence in residential construction dating back to when Kelly was a child. But surrounding this memorial to her father's legitimate career was evidence of Kelly's decadesal-long crime spree. Keys to houses throughout the county organized in labeled containers by address. Stolen items from each property. Not valuables, but personal touches like mailbox numbers, door handles, porch lights, and window screens. Things homeowners might not notice missing for months, if ever. And photographs. Thousands of photographs taken inside these homes while families slept, ate dinner, or went about their daily lives completely unaware they were being documented. But the most disturbing discovery was Kelly's collection of fake inspection reports she'd written for each house she'd violated. Detailed documents claiming structural defects, safety violations, and construction failures that required immediate attention. None of it was real. Kelly had simply made up problems that didn't exist, then appointed herself the expert who could fix them. Foundation settling in the northwest corner requires immediate reinforcement. Electrical wiring shows signs of 1970s code violations. Window installation suggests structural instability. Reading these reports, I realized Kelly had been playing house inspector for 20 years, convincing herself and trying to convince others that she was protecting people from dangers that existed only in her delusional mind. Officer Harris found something that made everyone's blood run cold. A detailed floor plan of my house with notations about optimal entry points and inspection priorities. Kelly had been planning her invasion of my home for months, mapping out exactly how she'd gain access and what she'd inspect once inside. The margins were filled with notes like, bedroom windows face street, perfect for safety monitoring, and basement access through exterior door, father's construction standards must be verified. This wasn't random harassment. It was a methodical campaign designed to give Kelly total access to every inch of my property. In the corner of the basement, we found what appeared to be Kelly's active cases file, current surveillance photos of 6 different split-level houses throughout the county, all with the same obsessive documentation I'd seen applied to my property, license plate numbers of residents' work schedules, family routines, and detailed notes about when houses were empty. Kelly hadn't just been terrorizing Peterson and targeting me. She'd been stalking multiple families simultaneously, preparing for a coordinated harassment campaign that would have destroyed lives across 3 counties. The woman was running a one-person reign of terror that nobody had connected because her victims were scattered and isolated. That's when David Turner, Kelly's younger brother, arrived at the scene. David had driven up from 2 states away after learning about his sister's arrest, and seeing the contents of her basement broke him completely. Our father died when Kelly was 12. He told us, tears streaming down his face as he stared at the shrine. Construction accident at a split-level housing development. Kelly never processed the grief, created this elaborate fantasy that residents had sabotaged his work, that his reputation needed to be defended. David explained that he'd tried getting Kelly professional help for 20 years, but she'd always seemed functional enough to avoid forced intervention. She held down jobs, maintained a relationship, seemed normal, except for this one obsession with split-level houses. The psychiatric evaluation Kelly underwent while in custody revealed the depth of her delusion. According to the court-appointed psychiatrist, Kelly suffered from what he called complicated grief with paranoid delusions, specifically triggered by architectural features reminiscent of her father's work. In Kelly's mind, every split-level house contained evidence that could either vindicate or condemn her father's legacy. She genuinely believed that by inspecting these homes and finding them structurally sound, she could somehow resurrect their relationship and prove his competence as a builder. It was heartbreaking and terrifying at the same time. A 12-year-old girl's trauma had metastasized into a 40-year campaign of psychological warfare against innocent families. But here's what made the shrine discovery even more disturbing. Kelly had been escalating. The early houses in her collection showed minimal violations, a few stolen items, basic photography, and simple fake inspection reports. But as the years progressed, her invasions became more elaborate, her documentation more detailed, her violations more severe. Peterson represented the peak of her evolution as a predator. She'd learned to manipulate vulnerable targets, establish fake authority, and systematically destroy their peace of mind. If we hadn't stopped her, Kelly would have eventually graduated to even worse crimes, possibly including physical violence against anyone who interfered with her inspections. The evidence collection took 6 hours, and by the end, we had documented proof that Kelly Turner had committed felony breaking and entering in at least 12 different homes over 2 decades. Each violation represented a family, terrorized a sense of safety, destroyed a home that would never feel secure again. The district attorney's office was building a case that could put Kelly away for 25 years. But for me, standing in that basement, surrounded by the artifacts of her obsession, the legal victory felt hollow. How many families had suffered because nobody connected the dots? How many Petersons had died alone and afraid because Kelly's pattern was too scattered to detect? As we prepared to leave Kelly's house of horrors, David Turner pulled me aside with tears in his eyes. "Kelly hasn't just been watching split-level houses," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "She's been inside all of them. She believes if she can prove her father's construction was perfect, he'll somehow know from beyond the grave. She's been searching for 20 years, collecting evidence, building a case for a trial that will never happen." The horrifying realization hit me like a freight train. If Kelly had been breaking into split-level houses for 2 decades, collecting evidence documenting families, how many other people never knew she was in their homes while they slept? Tell me in the comments what's the creepiest thing a neighbor has ever done to you. Because what we discovered next about Kelly's final plan made everyone's skin crawl. 3 months later, we sat in a packed courtroom watching Kelly Turner's carefully constructed delusion crumble in real time. The trial for false emergency reporting, breaking and entering and stalking should have been straightforward. We had mountains of evidence, witness testimony, and Kelly's own recorded 911 call. But what none of us expected was for Kelly to use her court appearance as a platform to defend 20 years of criminal behavior as legitimate safety work. Sitting in that courtroom, watching this woman who had terrorized so many families try to justify her crimes, I realized we weren't just witnessing a trial. We were watching the final collapse of someone who had lost touch with reality so completely that she couldn't distinguish between helping and harming. The prosecution opened with our 911 recording, and hearing Kelly's voice boom through the courtroom speakers gave me chills all over again. "This is Kelly Turner, HOA, Safety Coordinator for Oakwood Estates. I'm at 1247 Oak Street. I can hear someone in distress inside, but the residents are refusing mandatory safety inspection. I need immediate police assistance to gain entry for an emergency welfare check." The prosecutor paused the recording and addressed the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, you'll hear testimony that Kelly Turner held no position with any homeowners association, had no authority to inspect anyone's property, and made this call for the sole purpose of forcing her way into the defendant's home." But Kelly, sitting at the defense table, was nodding along like the recording proved her point. What made the trial surreal was Kelly's absolute conviction that she was the victim. When the prosecutor asked, "Miss Turner, do you understand that HOA coordinators don't have authority to force entry into homes?" Kelly's response was immediate and unshakable. "Your Honor, community safety codes supersede individual property rights. These split-level houses require regular structural monitoring due to construction methods used in the 1970s. Even facing 25 years in prison, she maintained the delusion that she was a misunderstood public servant being persecuted for doing her job. The woman genuinely believed that everyone else was wrong, and she was the only one trying to protect people from invisible dangers." Ashley's testimony was the emotional centerpiece of the trial, and watching my wife relive that night was heartbreaking. As a 911 dispatcher for 6 years, Ashley told the jury, "I've handled thousands of emergency calls, but dispatching officers to my own home based on false claims from the defendant, that's something I'll never forget." Her voice broke slightly as she continued, "The defendant manipulated emergency systems designed to protect people in crisis. She turned my training, my dedication to helping others, into a weapon against my own family." When the defense attorney asked if Ashley felt personally targeted, her response was perfect. "No, I felt professionally violated. She corrupted the system I've devoted my career to protecting." The prosecution methodically presented evidence from Kelly's basement shrine, and watching the jury's faces change as they saw photos of stolen house items and fake inspection reports was satisfying in a dark way. Peterson's daughter, Ellie, had flown in from Oregon specifically to testify, and her impact statement reduced half the courtroom to tears. My father spent his final weeks convinced his own home was trying to kill him, Ellie testified. The defendant convinced a 73-year-old man that his house was structurally unsound, that he needed constant monitoring, and that she was the only person qualified to keep him safe. She didn't just harass him. She made him afraid of the place he'd lived peacefully for 15 years. But the moment that defined the entire trial came when Kelly took the stand in her own defense. The woman who had terrorized multiple families, broken into countless homes, and destroyed Peterson's final months of life, actually believed she could convince a jury that her crimes were justified. "Your Honor," Kelly began. "These split-level houses built in the 1970s have systematic structural vulnerabilities that most residents don't understand. My father was a master builder who specialized in this type of construction. When I inspect these properties, I'm continuing his legacy of ensuring residential safety standards." The delusion was so complete, so utterly divorced from reality that even her own lawyer looked uncomfortable. The prosecutor's cross-examination of Kelly was devastating because he didn't need to attack her. He just let her talk. "Miss Turner, did any homeowner give you permission to enter their property? Permission isn't required for emergency safety inspections. Did any government agency authorize your inspections? Community safety transcends bureaucratic authorization. Did you have keys to houses you didn't own? Emergency access keys are standard protocol for safety coordinators." Every answer revealed how deep Kelly's delusion ran. She had created an entire fantasy world where she was an official authority figure protecting people from dangers only she could see. The turning point came when the prosecutor played Kelly's 911 call one more time and asked, "M. Turner, what exactly did you hear that constituted an emergency?" Kelly's response made everyone in the courtroom freeze. "I heard the sounds of a house settling improperly due to foundation issues. The structural stress created auditory distress signals that indicated immediate safety concerns requiring inspection." Even the judge looked stunned. This woman had called 911 because she thought my house was making sounds that indicated construction defects. The level of delusion was so profound that it crossed from criminal into genuinely disturbing mental illness territory. Kelly's final statement to the court was the moment her delusion was completely shattered in public. Standing before the judge, handcuffed and facing decades in prison, she made one last desperate plea. "Your Honor, I never told anyone about what I really found in those houses during my inspections. The structural evidence I've collected over 20 years proves systematic construction failures that could endanger entire families. If the court would allow me to present my findings, you'd understand that my actions were justified by public safety concerns." The judge's response was swift and final. "Ms. Turner, breaking into people's homes is not justified by imaginary construction problems. Your obsession has caused immeasurable harm to innocent families." The guilty verdict on all charges came back in less than 2 hours. Kelly Turner was sentenced to 3 years in prison, suspended pending psychiatric treatment, 5 years probation, conditional on treatment completion, $25,000 in restitution to Peterson's family and the Bradley family, who had been forced to sell their home and relocate, and lifetime restraining orders protecting all her victims. But even as the sentence was read, Kelly maintained her delusion. "The structural evidence will vindicate everything," she called out as bailiffs prepared to escort her away. "Those houses hide construction defects that need to be exposed." The judge's final statement was perfect. "Ms. Turner, the only thing your actions exposed was your complete disconnection from reality." As Kelly was led away to begin psychiatric treatment, she turned back to the courtroom with one final question that made everyone's blood run cold. "Your Honor, what if I was right about the construction defects all along? What if those houses really do contain evidence that needs to be found?" The judge looked directly at Kelly and delivered the line that ended her 20-year reign of terror. "Ms. Turner, the only evidence in those houses was evidence of your crimes." But sitting there watching Kelly's final moments of freedom, one terrifying thought haunted me. What did Kelly discover in those split-level houses that she never revealed? And was her obsession based on something real? 6 months later, sitting in my backyard, hosting a small barbecue for the neighbors who had stood with us through Kelly's reign of terror, I finally felt like I could breathe again. The psychiatric facility where Kelly was receiving treatment had reported significant progress. Apparently, intensive therapy and medication had helped her begin processing her father's death for the first time in 40 years. David Turner called me monthly with updates, and according to him, Kelly was slowly accepting that her safety inspections had been criminal violations, not heroic community service. But the most important change: Kelly had finally stopped talking about structural defects and started talking about grief loss and the 12-year-old girl who never learned how to say goodbye to her father. The community healing process had been slower and more complicated than I expected. You'd think that removing a terrorizing predator would immediately restore peace, but trauma doesn't work that way. Mrs. Hayes still checked her locks 3 times every night. Harold had installed motion sensor lights that turned his yard into a miniature stadium whenever a cat walked by. The Washington family had moved away entirely, selling their house at a loss rather than living with memories of Kelly's surveillance. Even with Kelly locked away receiving treatment, her victims were still dealing with the psychological damage she'd inflicted. That's the thing about predators like Kelly. The harm they cause echoes long after they're stopped. Ashley's recovery had been the most challenging to watch. As a 911 dispatcher, she was trained to help people in crisis. But Kelly had turned that training into a weapon against her own family. For months after the trial, Ashley struggled with what she called dispatcher's guilt. The knowledge that her professional competence had been exploited to harm the people she loved most. She'd taken a temporary leave from emergency services and was working with a department counselor who specialized in jobriated trauma. But there was a silver lining. Ashley had become a recognized expert in recognizing harassment patterns in emergency calls. And she was helping train dispatchers across 3 counties to identify when callers might be abusing the system. Ellie Peterson's visit for the barbecue was emotionally difficult but necessary. She'd driven down from Oregon specifically to see the house where her father had spent his final terrified months. And walking through rooms Kelly had violated gave her a kind of closure I hadn't expected. "Dad would have loved this," Ellie said, watching Harold flip burgers while Mrs. Hayes organized a potluck table. Actual community, not surveillance. People choosing to spend time together instead of being forced into it by some delusional safety coordinator. Ellie had used her father's life insurance money to establish a foundation that provided legal assistance to elderly victims of neighbor harassment, turning her family's tragedy into protection for other vulnerable people. The most surprising development was Harold's transformation from reluctant witness to community advocate. The guilt he felt about not helping Peterson had motivated him to become the neighborhood's unofficial ombudsman for dispute resolution. Harold had started a monthly coffee meeting for residents to discuss concerns before they escalated, and his police background gave him credibility with both neighbors and authorities. "I failed Peterson by staying neutral," Harold told the group. "Sometimes being a good neighbor means getting involved even when it's uncomfortable." Mrs. Hayes had started attending these meetings, and even the new family who bought the Washington's house had joined the informal support network. But the real measure of our recovery was how normal everything felt. My security system had been downgraded from fortress mode to basic home protection. Ashley and I could have conversations about work without checking over our shoulders. I could work in my home office without wondering if Kelly was measuring my windows from the street. The simple pleasure of living in your own house without fear, without constant vigilance, without wondering if your neighbor was planning to break in. That's something you don't appreciate until someone tries to take it away from you. Kelly's arrest and treatment had given us back the basic human right to feel safe in our own home. The legal aftermath had been more satisfying than I expected. Kelly's restitution payments were helping cover Ellie Peterson's counseling costs and Harold's upgraded security system. The district attorney had used Kelly's case to push for stronger penalties for harassment that targets elderly or vulnerable residents. 3 families from Kelly's basement collection had come forward with their own stories of mysterious break-ins and property violations that suddenly made sense once they learned about her 20-year crime spree. Kelly Turner, the woman who thought she was protecting community safety, had actually made multiple communities less safe through her systematic violations of trust and security. David Turner's monthly updates painted a picture of genuine psychological recovery that gave me hope for Kelly's victims. She cried for 3 hours when she finally accepted that her father wasn't coming back. David told me during his last call. Then she cried for 6 hours when she realized what she'd done to all those families in his name. Kelly's treatment team had helped her understand that her structural inspections were actually attempts to maintain a connection with her deceased father. She'd been trying to prove his competence as a builder by finding flaws in other people's homes, then fixing problems that didn't exist. The basement shrine wasn't just an obsession. It was a 40-year conversation with a ghost who couldn't answer back. The final twist in Kelly's story came during a court-ordered victim impact meeting where she faced some of the people she'd harmed. Ashley and I attended via video call, and seeing Kelly without her delusions was jarring. She looked smaller, older, genuinely remorseful in a way that felt real rather than manipulative. "I know saying sorry doesn't undo the fear I caused," Kelly told the group. "I spent 20 years thinking I was protecting people, but I was actually the danger they needed protection from." Her psychiatrist explained that Kelly's recovery would be ongoing. The trauma that created her obsession ran deep and healing would take years of intensive therapy. As the sun set over our backyard barbecue, I reflected on how a simple property purchase had led to such an insane chain of events. Moving to a new house should be boring. Boxes, paperwork, meeting neighbors, settling in. Instead, we'd accidentally bought the target of a decadecile-long delusion and become unwilling participants in someone else's unprocessed grief. But in a weird way, Kelly's attack on our family had created something positive. A genuine community of people who looked out for each other, who didn't ignore warning signs, who understood that sometimes being a good neighbor means getting involved even when it's uncomfortable. Ashley found me standing by the fence where Harold had first warned me about Peterson, and she wrapped her arms around me as we watched our small gathering of friends and neighbors. "You know what's crazy?" she said, leaning against my shoulder. "Kelly tried to use my job to hurt our family, but in the end, it was exactly that training that helped us survive. Her. I thought about the chain of events that brought us here. Kelly's call to force her way into our house. Ashley being the dispatcher who took that call, the investigation that followed, and the community that formed around stopping her. It was like some kind of cosmic justice where the weapon Kelly tried to use against us became the tool that saved us." Looking back at our house, the same house Kelly had obsessed over, photographed and tried desperately to invade, I realized something profound. "She called 911 to try forcing her way into our home," I told Ashley. "But that call became exactly what saved everyone. Some mysteries are solved and court justices served and communities heal. But others might be buried right beneath your feet, waiting for the next obsessed neighbor to start digging. The good news, now we know how to recognize them, how to stop them, and most importantly, how to protect each other when someone's delusion tries to destroy our peace. That's the power of sharing these stories here on The Silent Brave. Real experiences that help us all stay safer. Hit that like button if this story opened your eyes to neighbor red flags you might have missed. I'm your host, and I'll see you in the next video where we dive into another story that proves truth really is stranger than fiction.